we will be learning the Sicha of Vayishlach, Chelek Yud, and the Sicha is discussing a Rasha in this week's Parsha, Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk Vav Zayin. This is where after Yaakov came back to Eretz Canaan, so the Torah tells us in Pasuk Vav, as the Rebbe begins the Sicha b'Parshaseinu Mesupar, Asher Esav Lokach es Noshav, Vayelech el Eretz mipnei Yaakov Ochiv. So the Pasuk says that Esav took Vayikach Esav es Noshav, ve'es Bonov, ve'es Bnoisov, ve'es Kol Nafsho is Beisoi, ve'es Mikneyu, ve'es Kol Be'emtoi, ve'es Kol Kinyonoi Asher Rochash be'Eretz Canaan. Esav took his wife, his sons, his daughters, all the people of his household, his flocks, all his animals, and all his properties that he had acquired in the land of Canaan. Vayelech el Eretz, and he went el Eretz to find another land. Mipnei, as Rashi says, lo gur b'asher yimtzo, to find a place wherever he will find to live. Mipnei Yaakov Ochiv, because of Yaakov, his brother. This is Pasuk Vav. Pasuk Zayin continues. But Pasuk Shel Achrei Zeh, Mevur Ratam. The Pasuk gives us the reason why Esav left Canaan. Says the Pasuk, Ki oyo rechusham rov misheves Yachdov. Because their possessions were too numerous for them to dwell Yachdov, to dwell together. Velo yochlo eretz megureim loseis oisom, and the land which they settled could not support them. Yochlo loseis oisom, couldn't carry them or support them. Mipnei mikneim, because of their flocks. This is what the pasuk says, and Rashi explains. Ve'ine Rashi bepirushoi matik esateves. Rashi in the header puts the words in Pasuk Zayin, and he says, Lo yochlo eretz megureim, that their land which they inhabited could not, what could not, says Rashi, lehaspik mire la be'emoi shalohem, that the land did not and wasn't able to support, to provide enough space for their animals to graze. This is what Rashi says. And as we're going to see soon, Rashi continues with two other explanations. But before we go into the other two explanations, the Rebbe has a number of questions on this first explanation being brought by Rashi. Ve'inei, Rashi bepirushoi matik estevos v'lo yochlo eretz megureim u'mefarish, and he explains lahaspik mira, to provide a place for grazing, pasture, la be'emoi shalahem. Midrash Agoda, Mipnei Yaakov Ochiv v'chulu. The Midrash gives a second reason. Kedelakamon is going to be brought later in Seif Beis. Kavonas Rashi bepirusho hi ledas meforshim. What does Rashi intend in his pshat? What does Rashi add in his words? Lehaspik mira. So as meforshim explain, the Re'om, Rebbe Eliyahu Mizrahi, that ba'apasik nemar, the pasuk reads, "Velo yochlo loseis oisom mipnei mikneim." The literal translation of the word loseis is to carry, usually. Varei efshar leforesh hakosav kipshutoi loseis oisom, to carry them, mipnei koivdom, because they were too heavy, as usually the term loseis is associated with something which is too heavy of a load. So the word is that you can't carry it. Here, obviously, the earth, the land, does not need to carry these animals because of their heaviness, so therefore there is a challenge of carrying. That's why Rashi comes and explains that the issue was not literally carrying, but rather it wasn't enough space to afford for all those animals a place to graze. Ainu, ולכן מפרש להספיק מירה, היינו, שלא יוכלו לוסיס אויסום, פירושו שלא יוכלו להספיק צורכיהם. There wasn't enough space to provide for the needs of the animals, the pasture. This is what Rashi intends to explain. The word losses. The Rebbe, 4 questions on this Rashi. B'tzorich lovin. Aleph, im kavanos ish Rashi. Lefarish tevois, losses soisoi mipnei mikneim. If Rashi only comes to explain these words, the Pasik words, losses soisoi, which is lahaspik mire, la be'ema shalohem, to provide a place, enough place to graze for their flock, for their animals. Havele lehatik tevois elu mi'akosuf. Rashi should have copied those words. Velo yatevois velo yochlo eretz megureim. As the Rebbe always learns that the adder in Rashi leading to his explanation is because the explanation is specifically for those words that Rashi brings from the Pasuk. Here, seemingly, Rashi does not explain velo yochlo eretz megureim. Rather, Rashi explains the words losei soisam. What does it mean to carry? Rashi said there wasn't enough place for all of them were to graze. So then Rashi should have in his header write and bring over the words losei soisam, that words of the pasuk, and not the beginning of the pasuk. This is question 1. Base, the second question, Maiko mashmalon Rashi bepirushoi. What is Rashi teaching us here? In other words, why is it necessary for Rashi to explain that? It's self-understood, shekan b'negia le'eretz yefshar lefarish losses kipshute. The Ben Chomish Lemikro studies the pasuk, and he sees that it says v'lo yochlo eretz megureim losses soisom, and he translates the land couldn't carry them. It's self-understood that it doesn't mean carrying because the usual carrying of a load, because that's not what the land is doing, carrying the animals. Ubimeila, perusha lahaspik mira. So obviously the pshat is going to be that the land wasn't able to carry them, meaning like b'shem amushal, carrying them in a way of supporting them, of providing for them. So why does Rashi need to teach us? Especially Bufrat, that the same words we have already earlier. In the Parshas Lech Lecho Kvar Piresh Rashi ala Posik Veloi Noso Isomoretz, and this is when Avram and Lot are together, and they also decide to split. So it says Veloi Noso Isomoretz. So Rashi says, what does it mean Veloi Noso Isomoretz? Lo Yoiso Yechoilo lehaspik mire lemikneim. So the explanation is clear, that the land was not able to provide enough place for all their animals to graze. So Rashi already explained that a few parshas earlier. Bekan choizer Rashi umeforshoi. And here comes Rashi again, and he explains that seemingly this is unnecessary for Rashi to explain that. The fact that the Rebbe said that it's obvious that losses does not mean carrying like a load, but rather to provide for. So why Taki in Lech Lecho does Rashi find it necessary to explain? So for that he says in the Oref 4, Uma she'utzra Rashi lefarshoi beParshas Lech Lecho. Why in Parshas Lech Lecho does Rashi find it necessary to explain? The word losses means to provide a place for grazing. Ube'iker Birdei letaretz the loshen kotzoru is mainly, like Rashi says in Parshas Lech Lecho, that the issue was, if you look in Perek Yud Gimel in Parshas Lech Lecho, where it describes the story of Avram and Lot, so it says that they were both having a lot of sheep, a lot of cattle, and it says V'lo noso isom oretz l'sheves yachdov ki oyo rechushom rov. And Rashi explains that Lashon Kotzaru, that the pasuk is written very short, and the reading of the pasuk itself needs explanation. And therefore, because there is an issue with the way the pasuk is written, so Rashi went and he explained it. But here, we don't have that issue. As Rashi says there, lefichach kosav velo inoso beloshul zochor, and that the earth wasn't enough to provide, not neso'o. And it's basically, there's an issue with the pasuk. Here we don't have this issue in the pasuk. It's a very simple, self-understood pasuk. So the question is, why does Rashi explain it? And especially, if we need explanation, the explanation is already known from the previous parsha, which is Parshas Lech Lecha. Gimel. Third question is, Madua meshane Rashi miloshen hakosuf? Rashi changes by describing where and to whom the land did not have enough to provide. As Rashi says, bipnei mikneim. I'm sorry, in the pasuk it says bipnei mikneim. Bipnei mikneim, which means flock or cattle. Bekoisev, Rashi says, la behemoy shalem. Why does Rashi change from mikneim to the word behemoth? Be'ein lo ima Rashi bo lefarish tevas mikneim behemoth shalohem. That Rashi comes to translate the word mikneim means behemoth, animals. Shari mikno nema b'Torah kama pe'omim lifnei. The word mikne is mentioned in Torah many times, a few times before this pasuk in Vayishlach. Beloi piresh Rashi klum. And Rashi does not mention there explaining what the word mikne is, because we know that mikne means behemoth, means flocks. Beyeseiro mizu, even more so. Beparshas Lech Lecha anal, the same parsha with the pasuk was we mentioned earlier by Avram and Lot, beloi noso oiso ma'oretz, the land wasn't enough to provide for them. Koisef Rashi bepirushoi lehaspik mire lemikneim. So Rashi says that wasn't it enough for to provide pasture lemikneim for their cattle. Ainu shezeu teva shepirushoi pashut shari bekosuf shom lo niska mikne. So obviously Rashi accepts that mikneim, everybody understands mikneim means behemoth. So it's the irony is that in Parshas Lech Lecha, where the word mikne is not mentioned, Rashi puts it as a given that we understand what the word mikne is, and he says that the issue was that there wasn't enough place to provide for all their mikneim, which means their animals, to graze. And by us, where the word mikneim is written specifically in the pasuk, Rashi comes and changes for mikneim and writes the word behemoth, which is simply the translation of it. So this obviously begs explanation. The fact that the Rebbe said that usually the word mikneim is not being explained by Rashi, so he brings there's one place which is explained, but there is a reason for it. This is in the Orah 5. Ubepirush Rashi in Bereshis Perik Dalet Pasuk Chav, which is Pama Rishon Keniska Tevas Mikne b'Torah, the first time that the word Mikne is mentioned in Torah. The story of Cain and Hevel and their kids. So there in Parshas in Pasuk Chav it says regarding that Odo gave birth, but that Odo is Yovel, and Hu Hoyo Avi Yoshev Oyel Umikne, that he was the father of Yoshev Oyel, those who settle in tents, Umikne, and he was the father of those who are raising sheep. So Rashi says the tu oyo rishon leroye be'emois bemidboros, the first one of grazing animals in the midbar. And Rashi explains the word which in the Torah says mikne. Rashi does explain and translates as behemoth. So there, why does he explain it if it's everybody knows that mikne means behemoth? So he writes ubirde lefaresh avi mikne ashaychus de oyel umikne. There, Rashi comes to explain the connection between oil and mikne, because oil means tents, umikne means cattle. So what is the word Yoshev Oyel Umikne? So Rashi explains that because he was grazing animals in and in the Midbar, sheep. So he used to have to resettle himself, replace his tent in different places. 1 month he was in one place, and once they finished the pasture there, they moved into another place. He kept on pitching his tent everywhere. So, therefore, in explaining the connection, so therefore the word roye be'emo is mentioned. But because Rashi has to explain the pasuk together, what is the Siches from oyel umikne. So he goes into an explanation, and the explanation is already using the word that is being used usually for a roye be'emos, one who grazes animals. But usually the word mikne is self-understood, as he concludes. Rashi doesn't explain anything. And obviously, why doesn't he explain? Because it's self-understood. So the question number 3 is, why here does Rashi use the word behemoth? Dalet, the 4th question is, Ma koshe beperush lehaspik mire, shemishum ze utzra Rashi leovi oid perush. Before even we know what this other perushim is, as we mentioned earlier, Rashi brings a number of pshatim why Esav picked up his entire family and left. But the pasuk tells us a simple reason, that velo yochlo eretz megureim. So the question number 4 is, what is difficult, what is lacking in that pshat, which is seemingly the pashto pshat of the pasuk, that Rashi has to find yet other pshatim, ubifrat pirush shekad gosh as Rashi behatzmo yuloy al pipshutoi ki medrash agode. And especially he brings us a pshat which, as Rashi says, is a medrash. And Rashi's pshat is klal, as the Rebbe always emphasizes, is pshutei shemikra. Here he seemingly deviates from the pshat, and he brings a medrash agode, and seemingly it's not necessary. The pasuk tells you the reason, and Rashi explained what the pasuk means, and it fits perfectly according to pshat. So why does Rashi look for other pshatim? Before me, and he continues, Yeserem even more. Beperush, bepashas lech lecho anal, mistapeg Rashi ba'perush, lo yoiso yechoilo lehaspik mire lemikneim, ve'eno mevi perushim acherim. Going back to the first time the same idea is mentioned by Avram and Lot, Rashi only brings that reason, that there was not enough space for the animals to graze, and it does not bring any other reasons. So here, it's clearly in the pasuk, the reason, and yet Rashi looks to bring more reasons, which we're going to see later, and the question is why. Before we continue to the other perushim and analyzing them, in order 6, the Rebbe brings the Maharal. The Maharal explains a reason why Rashi is not satisfied with the first and simple pshat of the pasuk. Let's see order 6. Begur Aryeh Kosav, the Akoishi ba'perush harishon hu madua olach Esav le'eretz acheres ve'lo olach rak le'ir acheres be'eretz Knan gufe. Ki lo yitochen eretz she'idaled me'ot parso lo yochlo lo sesoiso. The Gurayed, so the Maharal in his Pirush Guraya on the Chumash, is actually explaining why Rashi adds another medrashic pshat to the simple pshat, which is what the pasuk says. And he explains, what does it mean? Let's say there is not enough place in that particular area. Is Eretz Knan not big enough for Esav and Yaakov, that Esav has to completely move from the entire land just because Yaakov is brother? He had to move out of Canaan. If there is no place, if there's no place in Canaan, then he would say that he left Eretz Canaan. It says he left Eretz Megureim, the place where they dwell, because there was an issue. There wasn't enough to provide for all of them. So then Rashi was bothered. If that's the only reason, what does it mean? The land of Canaan is a big country. Daled Mois Parsa. It's an expression which is used in the Gemara. Nizdazo Eretz Yisrael, Arba Mois Parsa, Arba Mois Parsa. Canaan is a large area. Why does he have to leave the country? He can live to another city in Canaan. Therefore, says the Maharal, L'chein mevi pirush ha-medrash ha-gode, mipnei shtar choiv. That's why Rashi brings a second shot, the medrash, which we're going to see later. Shemizeh muvnatam, she'olach Esau vel eretz acheres. Which will explain why he went to another land. He just didn't want to stay in Eretz Yisrael because he had a concern with Eretz Yisrael, which fits with the second shot in Rashi. Aval, even with the Maharal answer, says the Rebbe leitirates madua utzrach Rashi leovi gama perush levipnei abushe. Rashi brings a third shot. So let's say he needs the second shot to explain why he left the country altogether. But still, Rashi brings a third shot, and even according to the Maharal, it wouldn't answer why is there a need for the third shot, which Esau left because he was embarrassed to be there together with Yaakov, knowing that he sold them the Bchoire, as Rashi says. In the Shula Agilion of this order, the Rebbe brings the Ramban. Regam Ramban kan. The Ramban explains also that why Esau left Canaan altogether. So the Ramban says, Aval Esau biroisoi ki lo yuchal lamed beiroi ubemekoimoi oza v'skolo oretz leochiv ve'olach loi. The Ramban said that Esau saw that he wouldn't be able to be together in the same city, and therefore he left the entire land and he went. Which also in the Ramban, it's like, I guess the kasha is in the Ramban itself also. Why do you have to leave not only the city, you leave the entire Eretz because of that? He brings, Vayishlach hamtik ma she'olach le'ar seir, al pi ma shekosav Ramban, reish parshaseinu, but the Ramban brings in the beginning of Parsha, ba'avur, heyois negev Eretz Yisrael al yedei Edom, ve'oviv yoshav be'eretz ha-negev. So in other words, first the Rebbe brings that why did Esau, the Ramban explains, why did Esau leave the entire country? Why did he leave Canaan altogether? Because he saw that it wasn't only the city, he left the entire country. But still, I think the kasha which we have in Rashi, why Taka did he have to leave the whole country, is the same kasha which I guess is also according to the Ramban, and we need to have another explanation why Taka he left the entire country. But the Rebbe brings over here that the Ramban in the beginning of Vayishlach, that Vayishlach Yaakov Ereisa Vochiv Artso Seirs De Edom. The Ramban says, why did Esau was in Artso Seir? So the Ramban says because Eretz Yisrael, the south side of Eretz Yisrael, borders with Edom. And Yitzchak lived in Eretz HaNegev, in the south. And Yaakov had to pass through Edom, or close to Edom. And that's why Yaakov was concerned that Esau is going to hear about his return. That's why he sent them malachim, and he sent them messengers, and so on. So what we see from this Ramban in the beginning of the parsha, that Edom was close to Eretz Yisrael, which I guess gives us a little insight to why Esau moved to Seir, which is nearby Eretz Yisrael, to the Negev, where Yitzchak settled. Okay, so this is the kashas on the first pshat. Then we're going on to the other pshatim in Rashi, Eve base. Mamshi Rashi goes on and explains, Bepirusha Yumedrash Hagoda. The Medrash Hagoda says that why did Esau leave Canaan? Yaakov Vochiv Mipnei Shtar Choiv Shel Gzeras Kigeri Yezaracho Amutal Al Zarei Shel Yitzchok. There is a Shtar Choiv, there is a debt, so to speak. There was a decree which was given of Zarei Shel Yitzchok, who are going to settle in Eretz Yisrael, that they're going to be first strangers be'eretz lo Elohem, and they're going to be avodim, they're going to be enslaved and inflicted for 400 years. This is in Bris Ben Absorim in Parshas Lech Lecha. So that's what Esav said, Omar, Eilech li mikan. I'm going to depart from Eretz Yisrael now. I don't want to be here. Why? Because by leaving Eretz Yisrael, ein di chelek loy b'matono shenitno lo Haoros hazois. Not in the gift that Hashem gave this gift to Yitzchak and his descendants. I'm not going to be a part of it. Veloy b'piroi neshtar. And also not going to be a part of paying the debt, meaning if I don't take share in that gift, then I'm not going to be owed for that gift to end up in exile, in Golus, which was a part of the deal with Avram. The land is going to be given to Yitzchak, and they're going to be exiled. They said, I'm not going to take part in the land, and then I'm not going to go in Golus. That's why Esav decided to pick himself up and leave. So now, Rashi says that, and he continues, Umipnei abusha, shemocha b'choirosoi. This is seemingly a third reason that Esav was pushed embarrassed to face Yaakov, seeing them together every day, knowing that he was first the b'chor, and he sold them the b'chors, and now Yaakov is the b'chor. So he was pushed an embarrassment for him. That's another reason why he left. So here we have a medrash and two additional reasons to what seemingly the pasuk says. And this the Rebbe comes yet with another 6 questions on these 2 pshatim. וגם בזה צריך להבין, א', ידוע, כללי של רש"י בפירוש על התורה שהודיעו עצמוי. בפרשת בראשית, Rashi's own rule that he established in the beginning of Bereshit, which he wrote, אני לא בוסי אלא לפשוטי. I'm here only to explain the simple pshat on the pasuk. ולהגודה המיישבס דברי המקרא, דבר דובר על אופנov. I bring a medrash when it will explain the pasuk itself, according to the simple pshat of the pasuk. So sometimes Rashi does bring a medrash, but the medrash explains us to understand the pasuk, and the pasuk, the way the pasuk is written, al pshuta shel mikra. ובנידן זה, הרי פירוש המדרש הגודה הוא היפך המפורש בקרוא. Here the medrash is not only helping, the medrash is actually going opposite to what the pasuk clearly says. The pasuk says, the atam shevayelech el eretz hu ki oyo rechusham belo yochlo. So the pasuk specifically says that why did he leave? Because they had a lot of belongings and the land couldn't handle it. In that case, comes Rashi with another medrash, all meiser with tashtar choiv. He doesn't want to get to Golus, he's embarrassed. This is clearly not only explaining the pasuk, but it takes us to a direction and a reasoning which is opposite to what the pasuk provides. This is question 1. Regarding this question, he brings again the Maharal in Orah 9. What does the Maharal say? Begurah yekosav the medrash agode mevay rak hatam sheutzrach loleches leeretz acheres. That really the medrash is not coming to explain us the reason why Esav left. The medrash explains why Esav did not just leave the area, but he left the entire land of Canaan. Canaan Orah 6. As the Maharal writes, and he brings, the Rebbe quotes the Lashon of the Maharal, ומכל מקום, אי לאו טיימה, שלא יאכלו ארץ מגוריהם, לא יאכלך עתו, כמו שלא יאכלך עדינו. In other words, the Maharal explains there is really a combination of 2 reasons. The reason that he left Canaan is really because he had issue with not wanting to get the land, be a part of it, and then needing to go to Golus. He was afraid of the Golus aspect. But for this alone, why was he waiting till now? Till now he was living in Canaan. What happened suddenly? So really, it's what happens now is that Yaakov arrived, and there's no place for both of them. So he was taking the opportunity, taking so-called advantage of the opportunity and leave. As the Maharal says, Elo mipnei ki ato elo isiba acheres gamkein, shelo yochlo, the land couldn't handle it. I'm anyway going to leave because I don't want to end up to Golus. I don't want to be a part of the death of going to Golus 400 years. So now that he saw that Yaakov is here and there is a reason why he can't stay, velochein olach ato. Ve'al pi zeh, ein divrei ha-medrash hagoda bestira lema shenoma ki oyo rechushom begoymer. So according to this pshat, the Maharal learned, so it's really not a stira, because one explanation complements the other. Really, Esau wants to leave because he doesn't want to be a part of getting the Golus of Abraham Rishon. At the same time, he was still around, waiting, and he was, I guess, looking for an opportunity to leave. Now that Yaakov arrived, so the reason he left now was because of Yaakov. But the reason that he left altogether is because he didn't want to go to Golus. So this would have been an explanation why it's on the stira. Says the Rebbe, Aval re'ei le'ila Haoros 6. It says in Haoros 6, it still wouldn't explain why Rashi brings a third explanation, which is mipnei abusha, of embarrassment. And obviously, if it doesn't explain both things, so we need to have another pshat which will explain everything in Rashi, all the three pshatim. But going back to the first question, if we move a moment from the Maharal's pshat, so the question is again in the simple reason of the writing of the pasuk, Rashi's pshat seems a stira to what the pasuk itself says. Question number 2. Base. Rashi says, U mipnei abusha. It's seemingly a third pshat. And he says, and because of the embarrassment. Ve'loi kosa ve'yesh oimrim, ve'kayoytze boi kedarkoi bekol mokem shemevi pirush chodosh. Or bekamam bekoimes. Usually when Rashi brings a second pshat, he writes ve'yesh oimrim. Here Rashi doesn't say ve'yesh oimrim. He just adds u, which means and because of the embarrassment. The fact that he writes it in such a manner, this is not a complete different pshat of what the Medrash said of the Shtar Choiv, the concern of going to Golus. The way Rashi spells it out, it means that this third pshat is just adding to the second pshat. This third pshat, so to speak, complements the second pshat. So the Rebbe asked, "V'tzorich la'ovi narei ze inyan v'tam chodash legamre kademuchach gam b'medrash she'uva keperush noisav Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Oma b'pnei abusha." First of all, it is a complete new pshat. It's not nothing to do with the second pshat of Rashi. And if you look in the Medrash, it is actually quoted as a third pshat with a different Amoira which brings the name. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says b'pnei abusha. V'Rashi shino me'amedrash v'koilel shnei ha'taimim yachad. And as this brings in Or 11, that this question was asked by Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, and the fact that which he answers that Rashi brought them both together because they are both close to Shemikro is also not clearly explained, Zokuk Biur, and therefore this is a question which the Rebbe is going to deal with. Gimel. Third question on this Rashi is Mikiv and Rashi Eino Mistapik is a betam echot. Rashi is not so satisfied with one reason. Moisif Oitam, he brings an additional reason. Muchach she'ein be'echod mi'em levadoi kedei lachriach es Esov laze v'soretz. That neither of those reasons is sufficient enough to force Esov to leave the land. That's why you bring another reason. Both reasons, or three reasons, that's what got them to leave the land. But if you bring it to the Medrash, and you bring two pshatim, so the fact that you bring the first pshat is b'pnei shtar choiv, seems that this is the iker, the main reason. That's why Rashi brings that as reason number 1, before he brings the second reason that he was embarrassed of Yaakov. So the question is, what is greater, what value is there in this first reason, or in the reason of Shtar Choiv, that it makes it the main reason and the first reason for having Esau living Eretz Canaan? And even though it is counted as a main reason, it's still not enough. So the question is, first of all, why is that the main reason? And second of all, even being a main reason, what is lacking in that reason that you need to also have the third reason that he left Bipnei Abusha because he was embarrassed of having facing his brother Yaakov, knowing that he sold him the Bechorah. Dalet, fourth question is Le'atam sheyetzi also shel Esav in Haoros, oyo b'pnei shtar choiv, according to the Medrash Agoda, that he left because he didn't want to be liable to Golas. So then comes a very, very important question. Madua icher Esav yetzi osoi ad le'achar bias Yaakov michoron. Why did he delay it? Why are you waiting now for Yaakov to arrive from Choron and then decide to leave? It was already known from much earlier that there is the gzeira of Geri Ezaracho, that they're going to be strangers in a land not theirs. Ki meshenoilad Yitzchok uchal kvar pironoi, because when Yitzchok was born, it was already at that time the beginning of the Gzeira from Brisbane Absorin, as it's known, that we count the 400 years, according to some Pshatim, we counted from the time when Yitzchak was born, so it was already known, it was already in progress, so to speak. So then the question is, why is it that Esav, the old time, seemingly doesn't have any issue, and only now is suddenly reminds himself that it's time to leave? If he was really bothered for it, he should have been leaving earlier. The Rebbe says in Orah 12, if he goes back to the Maharal, which we mentioned earlier, that the Maharal Taka says that there was two things together, meaning he wanted to leave the old time. He just waited for and the opportunity to leave. He needed to so-called something to give him the reason that it's time to go. And when he saw Yaakov coming, he says, "Okay, now is the time." But without that, without the reason of Yaakov coming and not able to provide enough, the Maharal says Esav probably wouldn't leave, like he did not leave Tilna, or he could have left later. But Akoponim, the question is, Taka begufa shel inyan, to the very matter itself, what happened now that inspired them to finally take action? If this is a concern, what you should have had from the beginning, what suddenly tells Esav it's time to go? Hey, the fifth question. Ba'akdama leperush hamedrash hagoda b'pnei shtar choiv, ma tigrashi ateivois b'pnei Yaakov ochiv, shei b'posek hakoidem. Interesting that if you look in Rashi says what? That why b'pnei hagoda b'pnei Yaakov ochiv, because of Yaakov his brother, b'pnei shtar choiv. B'pnei Yaakov ochiv is posek vov, that Esav left because of Yaakov his brother. What happened to Yaakov his brother? Comes Pasuk Zayin and explains Skioyer Rechusham Rav. Comes Rashi. First he explains the simple pshat from the Pasuk, and then he brings the Medrash, and he begins the pshat of the Medrash that Esav left because of the concern of going to Golas. He said, Mipnei Yaakov Ochiv. How does these words, which is nairli a pasuk, suddenly coming in here by introducing the Medrash? Mipnei Yaakov Ochiv. That's question 5. Vav, question number 6. Yesera mezu, arei ze raya lister lepirush Rashi. She'eina mipnei shtar choiv de Avram, ki mipnei Yaakov. The fact that you are mentioning mipnei Yaakov Ochiv, and you bring in that the reason he left because of Yaakov, contradicts what the Medrash says. The Medrash says that this is a shtar choiv, a debt which was told to Avram. And he was afraid that that which was told to Avram and went to those who inherit the land is going to go to him if he stays there. And that's why he leaves. And here is the place that you mentioned Yaakov. Here is exactly Fakir. This is another place to mention Yaakov. This is only a concern about the Brit Ben Absorim, the covenant which took place with Avram, about going to Golus. So all this is questions that is difficult in the Rashi with the three pshatim that Rashi brought. So now starts the explanation, Seif Gimel. והביאור בכל זה, בפוסק שלפני זה נאמר, ויקח עשו, that Esav took ומפרט. And the posik says specifically what he took. It says, ואס מקניו, ואס כל באמתוי, ואס כל קניונוי, אשר רוחש בארץ כנען, וילך אל ארץ. It says that Esav took, in addition to his wife and his children, it says he took mikneyu, his flocks, and veskol be'emtoi, and all his animals, veskol kinyonoi, and all his property, I guess, asher rochach, that he acquired be'eretz Canaan. Ube'emshech lezeh, nemar, then it continues in the pasuk, Zion, that why did he leave? Ki hoyo rechusham rav misheves Yachdov. Because their possessions were too numerous for them to dwell together. Shebepashtes koi al kol alem alifneze. What was Rav? What was the issue? What was numerous? What was mentioned in Pasuk Vav, Mikneyu, Be'emtoi, Veskol Kinyonoi, Asher Rochash, Be'eretz Knan, the cattle and the animals that he had acquired in Knan, that is what Pasuk Zion says were too numerous for them to dwell together. Right? If that's the case, Valpi Zetzolich Loim Alichuura, the Zeh Shel Akosov Mesayim Belo Yochlo Eretz Megureyem Loses Oiso Mipnei Mikneyem, the fact that that's what the pasuk ends, that the land could not carry them or support them because mikneim, because of their flocks. Shebepashtus ein ze inyan chodosh. The pasuk is not introducing something, a new thing that was adding to the situation. Ki im bo behemshech umevayer ze sheoyo rechushom rav misheves yachdav. This is what the pasuk says. It continues. What was as Rechusha Misheves Yachdov was all that which they had with them. Right? Loikoi, so these words, Rechusha Rav Misheves Yachdov, to dwelling together, Loikoi al Tevas Mikneu Sheve Posik HaKoidem. Doesn't go on the word Mikneu, that only the cattle. That there wasn't enough to provide a place for the animals to graze. Ki'im perushoy umiloshun miknas kesef kol rechusham. Here the word mikneu does not apply to animals, but rather it would mean all what they had acquired. Like the Lashon is, Miknas Kesef, means Kol Rechusham, all what they had acquired. Upiresh HaKosuv lo yochlo eretz megureyem losis oisam, that the land could not carry them, who shelo yoyo mokoim be'eretz megureyem lohochil, to contain kol ma shekonu, all what they had bought, im bekesef, whether they bought it with money, oy be'oifen acher, or in any other way, Yaakov ve'Esav, Heipech, the opposite of Eretz Rechavas Yodayim Shel Lifnei Zeh. So the Rebbe first introduces a reason. He wants to explain why Rashi explains that there wasn't enough mirela be'emos, right? That there wasn't enough place to provide pasture or a place grazing for the animals. So he explains that the reason is because if you go in the reading of the Psukim, it seems that Esav is taking with him a lot of stuff out of Canaan. He takes the animals and kol be'emtoi, and then everything which he had ever acquired in the land of Canaan. Ever acquired, whether he acquired with money or in any other way. Maybe he used sheep to buy servants, as the Rebbe brings in Haoros 17 and Rashi in Vayetze. Rashi in Vayetze talks about Yaakov. Yaakov left Lavan's house, and he had with him also a lot of belongings. So it says, "V'skol rechusho yasher rochash," everything that they acquired. So Rashi dir in Parashat Vayetze, mikne kinyanoi, which he had bought with his cattle. And Rashi dir says that Yaakov bought with his cattle. He bought servants, maidservants, camels, donkeys, everything he bought with his camels. So Bepashtes, when it says that lo yochlo eretz megureim losis oisom, the pasuk says bipnei mikneim, because of what they had acquired. Bipnei mikneim would not just mean what they of the cattle, but rather it could have mean that they couldn't have handled everything that they both had. Everything that they both have. And this is what the Torah means to say with the words that lo yochlo oretz lo seisoisam. They couldn't carry all their belongings, but not just cattle. But if that's the pshat, if that's what the meaning of the pasuk would have mean, so then comes a strong question. And because of the next question, Rashi has to explain that the issue was really the cattle and not everything else. So let's read it inside. Let's first see what's the problem to understand that Esav left because of all of his belongings. He says like this, there's a big question in the pasuk. V'lo yochlo eretz megureim, the land couldn't handle mevayer zeh sheYaakov ve'Esav einom yecholim logu yachad be'eretz Canaan. So this explains us that they have too much stuff, and for some reason Canaan cannot handle both of the brothers, Yaakov and Esav. So fine, let's say that there is an issue. They have too much stuff, but then comes the real question: if that's the issue, so the question is, why does Esav leave? Let's see inside. Why is Esav the one who leaves? Two brothers. The lad can handle both of them together. Esav picks himself up. Why he? Eretz Canaan or Yomokim Megurei shel Esav. Eretz Canaan was originally the place that Esav settled. He lived in Canaan. For sure, all the years that Yaakov was in Haran, more than 20 years. So Esav is deal. And he settled here with all his family, with all what he had acquired. So the question is, how come that Esav picks himself up and he's the one who moves because Yaakov just arrived from Haran? Why you leave? I understand that the land can't carry you, but why are you the one who leaves? Yes, even more so. We don't even find that Yaakov is trying to do something and convince Esav to leave. The pasuk says, just because the land cannot carry them, Esav picks himself up, and in his own initiative, he takes with him a snashav and picks himself up. But this is a very, very strong question. By reading the pasuk, and you think to yourself, something doesn't add up here. There is an issue with handling both families and all their belongings. You have the brother who lives there forever, is there all the time, and he gets up and leaves because Yaakov arrived. Why he? But here's the key opener to explain us what Rashi wants to really teach us, what the issue was, and why Rashi had to explain what the pasuk says, V'lo yochlo, because this is going to tell us what happened there and why Esav left. What is it? Taritz Tmiozu, to answer this question. Which question? The question why Esav is the one who leaves. Mati Grashi Esatevois, Belo Yochlo Eretz Megureim. These words, Rashi comes to explain in these words, Velo Yochlo Eretz Megureim. This is the issue. And he explains the Mefarish that the reason is, what does it mean, Lo Yochlo? Lehaspik mirela be'ema shalohem. There wasn't enough place to provide a place for grazing for all their animals. Hainu shepirush de lasis oiso mipnei mikneim hu kebe pashes lechanal. Just like in Pashes Lech Lecha, dear by Avram and Lloyd, the issue was only the cattle. Here too, the issue was clearly the cattle, a place for pasture and a place for all those animals to graze. Not because all their belongings, and there was too much stuff that they all had. The issue was specifically related to the be'emois, and Rashi has to explain it to avoid the mistake of thinking that the issue is mikneya means all which they had acquired. Bezei yadgoshas Rashi la be'emois shelohem, to their animals, beloyle mikneyem kebekosuv. That's why Rashi specifically writes be'emois. Lishloil pirushanal, the mikneim miloshim miknas kesef, to avoid, to negate that mikneim here would be what we had acquired. Here mikneim means animals. And why is it important to tell us that mikneim means animals and that was the problem? Because if you explain that the issue is the place for pasture, a place for the animals to graze, is understood why Esav is the one who picks himself up. Shalpi ze moving shoyo le Yaakov adifus al Esav, that Yaakov had a priority over Esav, shemishum ze olach Esav mipnei Yaakov. Therefore, Esav is the one who leaves because of Yaakov, and not Yaakov leaves, and rather Esav, with his own initiative, decides to leave. What is the pshatake? Why is it now that we understand that mikneu means animals, and there's an issue with the animals? Why would that explain us the reason for Esav picking himself and leaving, even though he was settling in the land before Yaakov? So the Rebbe ve'abiur. The explanation is as follows. Parshas Vayetze, mesuper be'aruko, the Yaakov rochash mispar otzum shel tzoin u'mikne bebeis Lavan. Parshas Vayetze, we speak about Yaakov acquiring a tremendous amount of sheep and cattle in Lavan's house. As the pasuk says, Vayifroit so ish me'oid me'oid, tzoin rabois, in Parshas Vayetze, Pirush Rashi, Porois ve'rovois yoisa mishar tzoin. It wasn't just a lot of sheep. The sheep was more fruitful than usual sheep. There was a lot of sheep being born. And Yaakov came with a huge amount, an unprecedented number of sheep. That was Yaakov. Mashenken Esav. Shenyono yoyo tzayid isode. He was a hunter, the man of the field. Kolin yon isode. Whatever belongs to a field, not necessarily sheep, just working with animals, whatever type of animal it is. But there wasn't animals who need a place for pasture. In the field, there's all kinds of animals. Yaakov is the one who needs the place. He's the one who has the sheep. Regarding to a place for grazing, Yaakov is the one who has more to be concerned with, more to be providing for than Esav. A lot more. That the land cannot handle him, which is lahaspik mira, to provide a place for grazing. In this specific aspect for pasture, so Yaakov had a priority over Esav. That's why Rashi comes and explains the pasuk and it says that the issue was a place of pasture, only because the issue was pasture will explain us that when Esau sees that he really can be elsewhere, he doesn't have to stay here. That's his brother Yaakov who really needs this place for his sheep. That will answer the question, the big question, why was the one Esau the one who left and not Yaakov? And that's why Rashi comes and explains us what the pasuk means. Lo yochlo means lehaspik mira, a place for pasture for the animals, because this explains and emphasizes the reason for Esau being the one picking himself up. Before the Rebbe continues with the second pshatim in Rashi, which is obviously a continuation to this, let's first see a few of the orders. Going back to order 13. In order 13, saying inside that the words Losses Oisa Mipnei Mikneim is continuing what the pasuk says, Rechusham Rov Misheves Yagdov. So the Rebbe explains, Share bepashtus ma shekosov oyo rechusham Rov Misheves Yagdov koilel kol ha'inyonim shebishvilom yochu sheves Yagdov. Seemingly it includes everything, not just the sheep. And that's why we will need an explanation why was Esau the one who left, as we already saw. Then let's you can for the sake of time, let's move to Orah 19. But read 14 and 16. We can move to Orah 19. Orah 19 is the fact that he spoke inside that Esau was the one who left, and he asked a question since Esau was the one living in Canaan. So here comes a very interesting Orah 19 in explaining what does it mean Esau was the one living in Canaan. Esau already we find in Seir before. So the Rebbe explains what is the word that Esau was in Canaan and he picked himself up because of Yaakov. Let's see it inside. Orah 19. The gam koidem bias Yaakov michoron. Kvar oyo Esau be'eretz Seir. Before Yaakov came from Choron, already Esau settled in Seir. Kademuchach im asher koslu betchilas pashaseinu. Vayishlach Yaakov artso Seir. Beginning of the parsha, Yaakov is sending messengers to Esau. Where is Esau? Artso Seir. V'chein ksiv. It's also written in our parsha. Vayosha bayoymahu Esau ledarkoi Seiro. The Esau traveled back to his way to Seir. So the question is, Seiro means ledarkoi. Seemingly, what ledarkoi Seiro means? To his normal way, to where he settles, where he lives, in Seir. So why is that? What does it mean when it says in the Pnim that he was actually from Canaan? So the Rebbe says, if you look in our discussion, in our pasuk, when Esau picks himself up, it says in pasuk Vav, Vayelech el Eretz. And Rashi said, what's el Eretz? El Eretz, to go find a place to live. Only when it comes pasuk Ches, it says Vayeshev Esau be'ar Seir, that Esau settled in the land of Seir, in the mountain of Seir. So he's looking for a place, and he settles in Seir. So muven shekoidem ha'alicha, oyo iker megurav shel Esau, v'noshav u'bonav kol kinyonim be'eretz Knoan. So this itself, the psukim tell you that really where he settled was, where he lived before was in Canaan. Elo shenimtzo gam kein be'eretz Seir. He used to also hang out in Seir. And therefore he begins his journey. Esau seemingly doesn't even know where he's going. And eventually, Vayeshev be'ar Seir, it's only later that he actually settles in our Seir. But he wasn't really living in Seir before. He wasn't living in Seir before. And as he brings, this is also in the Ramban, that as the Ramban learns as Rashi, Ramban says clearly, Vayelech el Eretz, that he was traveling to see which land he's going to find to settle until he came to Seir. So clearly that what he was in Seir before was just like more like hanging out in Seir, but that wasn't his settled place. ומה שרש"י אינו מפרשו, אף שכמדובר בכמה פעמים שבפירושו מיישב רש"י כל קושי המסורת בליבוד הדרך הפשט. The question is, when you learn the psukim and you see that Esav lives Canaan, so the Chomesh Mikol Canaan, what does it mean he lives Canaan? He's always in Seir. In the beginning of Vayishlach, we saw Esav in Seir. And Rashi should have responded to such a question. It says in the Pasik, which is the Pasik that he mentioned earlier, in Perek Lamed Gimel, Pasik Tezayin, so it says in Pasik, that after they met, Vayoshav Vayoimahu Esav, that on that day Esav went back, Ledarkoi Seiro. He went back, Ledarkoi. What does Ledarkoi mean? Seiro. What's Ledarkoi? So Ledarkoi means that it wasn't his land. It was a place that he used to hang out there. As the Rebbe explains, the Darkei Sira in Loisha say Artzoi. Doesn't say le Artzoi to his land, to his home sale. Elorag Darkoi. So Yorogi Leilach Shom. He used to go there, hang out there, go there, but it wasn't his home. So therefore the Pasuk tells us le Darkoi, so the Bechomesh Lemikra already knows that Seir is not his land. And therefore we can explain here too that even though he was in Seir, his home really was Canaan. And that's what the Chidush is, that Esav left Canaan in order to give place for Yaakov. Ve'atam, moving bepashtus, why take did Esav hang out in Seir? What was it, Ledarkoi, even though he lived in Canaan? The Rebbe says the reason is because Esav was ish yedei tzayid, ish sode, he was a man of the field, so he named so Tomid besode. It was the opposite from dwelling in tents, which Yaakov was. That's why he was hanging out in Zdei Edom, in Arz Seir, because there was a place of fields. It's called Zdei Edom, and being it a Zdei Edom, therefore he was settling there. So this explains us that really he was in Canaan, and we're going back to the Chiddush that he left Canaan just in order to give Yaakov the opportunity to take care of his mikneh and his sheep. And now I'm turning to Seif Dalet. So this is the reason of the pasuk. But this explains that Esav was really a nice guy, acting nicely to Yaakov, that he had sheep, so he made sure to leave to give him the place. But we don't usually know Esav as being the so-called the nice guy. So therefore the Rebbe comes to Seif Dalet explaining why Rashi brings the other pshati. Omno, moving she after Rashi started Piruz elevad. That Rashi cannot be sufficient with this pshat ketam al zeh sheolach Esav mipnei Yaakov. That should be the reason why Esav left Canaan because of Yaakov. Ki doicha godel. It's doichak to say that Esav would leave his place in kol hashaloi b'pnei yoshel v'tzedek, just because it's trying to be, because it's the right thing to do, to give Yaakov, who has much more sheep to you, the place to stay there. That's not who Esav is. Ubefrat Yaakov nichnas begvulo. He's already living there much before, and Yaakov is now coming in, entering his border, his domain, and Esav will pick himself up and leave. Doesn't make sense. It needs further explanation. We need to find another reason what really inspired Esav to leave. Gam lefi pirus ze einoy moving. Why does the pasuk say that he left? Because Esav, his brother, why is it important the word ochiv? The fact that the pasuk emphasizes Yaakov as a brother has to be that there is something about the brother aspect. ולכן מוסיף רש"י ומדרש הגודל מפני יעקב אחי, מפני שטר חויב ומפני הבושה. Rashi adds now the words from the earlier pasuk that really it is Yaakov Achiv. And Yaakov Achiv, Yaakov was his brother, which brings up the two issues. The Shtar Choiv, the future Golus, and the embarrassment. Shebizeh moving asiba leatokas Esav b'pnei Yaakov. The reason why Esav is the one who picked himself up. LeEsav oyu taimim sheyazev eretz Canaan. Esav really had reasons to leave Eretz Canaan. The two reasons that we mentioned now. Lochen keshenizgalgelu advorim belo yochlo eretz megureim lo sisoisom. That finally came a practical concern that the land cannot handle both of their sheep. Umuchrach echod meyem lehatik moshavoi ozav Esav esoretz. Therefore Esav picked himself up, but not because Esav was really only acting righteously. Esav had two big reasons that he couldn't stand being in Eretz Yisrael with Yaakov. That Lo Yochlo Oretz gave him the official so-called formal, technical excuse that it's time to get to pick up now. Val Pize moving, that Mevur b'Medrash eino isoiser pshat aksuvim. It's not like we thought before that it's a contradiction to the simple pshat she'atam le'azivas Esav ki hoyo rechushom rav, which is seemingly what the pasuk says. And now the Medrash brings a new pshat. No, each pshat complements the other. The pshat that the Torah brings, as the Rebbe says, ki zeu tam rak al klolus inyan she'uchlach echod miyem lazei v'oret. This only explains you the general reason. Why does one have to leave? Not Dafke Esav. The one could have been Yaakov too. Why one of them has to leave? Of that is what the pasuk says. Keduyek hakosuf k'oyer rechusham rav misheves Yaakov, to dwell together, but lo yochlo, they can't carry them both together. Medrash bevar prat noisaf. Lo mo olach Esav ipnei Yaakov. There is two aspects here. One element is what happens, why can't they stay together? The pasuk says there's too much sheep and there's not enough pasture for both. Why is Esav the one who leaves? But Rashi brings the Medrash. Moving the Yukosh Rashi ba'tokas hatevois Medrash Agode. Rashi has the words Ipnei Yaakov Achiv. So if you remember earlier about the question, why do you bring in the words Yaakov Achiv in pasuk Zion, which is actually written in pasuk Vav? Because b'zeh madgish Rashi she'ataimim aboim amuvoim medrash Agode. The Rashi explained that the reason which I brought in Medrash mevarim rak prat zeh. In Medrash you're going to find only this specific reason. Madua Esav ipnei Yaakov achiv. Why is it that he leaves? Because Yaakov is brother. Yaakov maybe should be the one who should be told to get out of there. Why is it that Esav has to be the one leaving? And that's what Rashi comes to explain. The Medrashim explain it. Because Esav was worried of the Shtar Choiv, he was worried about the embarrassment. Rashi mati gam tevas ochiv. The Rameis, Rashi wants to allude to us, Shalidei pirush zeh de Shtar Choiv, yuven gam gen shemuchrach hakosuf lehadgish kana achvo. Because of the word of Shtar Choiv, because of the pshat, there is a debt. That's why the pasuk has to emphasize that they were brothers. And they were brothers which had inherited the promise which was given from their grandfather Avram to their father Yitzchak. So they're all carrying seemingly the same responsibility of perhaps ending up in Golus. If you having a part of it soul and ending up in Golus. And that's what that's what Esav is trying to avoid. And that's why he leaves. And that's why it says Ochiv. If it was just because the land can't handle, so it's not important. Is it because he's your brother or he's not your brother? That's not important. But here that we are mentioning the Yerusha, with the complaint, with the Bris Ben Absorim, here it is important to mention the fact that there is actually Yaakov Achiv. The devotee is that Yaakov is the brother. Seifei. Al pize izbar gam kein lomo lo Yosef Esav eseretz Knoan mipnei Shtar Choiv shegzeras gigeri esacho koidem shechoza Yaakov michov. Now the Rebbe returns to the question, why is he waiting till now? If he really is concerned, the Shtar Choiv, why didn't he leave earlier? What instigated him now to leave, that Yaakov arrived, now he remembers that he might end up in Golus. So it explains, because of Mefuresh, Atam lechlolus ha-meure, ki oyo rechusham rav. Beze yichriach oz ato kas echad miyem. Ubimele bo ha-shinui. In other words, like this. The Rebbe says, till now, Yaakov, Esav, wasn't necessarily deal by making a choice. He was in Canaan, because there where his father lived. Now, there is an issue. Esav is there, and Yaakov is there. And there is a problem that the land does not handle both. And at this point, we have to make a achlata. Got to make a decision. Who stays, who lives. The moment you decide to stay, you're committing to the so-called the old package. I'm going to stay here, and therefore, I'm going to might end up in Golas too. So now when Esav has to make the achlata, or whether or not he associates with Eretz Canaan, with Eretz Yisrael, and with the family inheritance, and therefore ending up in Golas, this is the time which he decides it's time to leave. Let's see it inside. Ad Oz, until the time when there was the issue of Oyo Rechusham Rav, Einoi Boru Muchlat Adain, Mi Yeshalem Ashtar, who is going to pay the debt? Oy She Yeshalem Shneim. Af Shegor Ba'oretz, is Yaakov going to pay it? Abod going to pay it? Who are going to end up in Golus? Ki zeu emshech im megurei aviem. Even though he lived in the land, but he only lived there because his father lived there. So Lav Dafke, he is the one who is going to get Golus because he really wasn't choosing to live in Eretz Yisrael. Avol, kishemuchrach asa tokas echod miyem, at the time that they need, somebody has to move. So Arei Hasheni, Anishar, mevarer al yedei ze datoi v'achlotosei, leshalem gam ashtar cheiv. So at this point, whoever stays, takes upon himself the commitment that I'm going to take the whole package. I'm going to stay in Eretz Yisrael, plus getting the debt which is to go later in Golus. Zeu shemari Rashi beperush de velo yochlo. Ve'uchrach kol echad mem lahachlit. Each one had to make a decision whether I'm moving or not. U'bimele gam la'ashtar. Am I going to be holding that written death or not? Azai, it's only then Esav Omar Eilech li mikan. That's why Rashi said Esav said, I'm going. Ein li chelek, loy b'matone, ve'loy b'piroi nashtar. I don't want to have any part in it, because that's the moment when he had to be clear and make up his mind. And he made up his mind very clearly by saying, no, I'm not staying here because I don't want to deal with the consequences of paying the star choif too. So that's what it all comes very beautifully together. Why Rashi brings the Medrash Agod. In Ora 25, the Rebbe brings there are two other pshatim by other mefarshim, and he says why Rashi doesn't explain it. Let's see Ora 25. Al pi ze move ma Rashi lo ipirish ke kama mefarshi atero Rashbam Chizkuni Regam Ramban de ma sheolach Esav mipnei Yaakov oyo mipnei shemocha lo yapchoiro v'lechein oyo bedin sheYaakov yirash haaretz. These mefarshim say that the reason why Esav is the one who picked himself up and left is simply because Yaakov sold him the birthright. So therefore, legally, Yaakov is the Yoresh. Why doesn't Rashi explain it? So it says the Rebbe, ki nema ki oyo rechusham, the fact that the pasuk says that they left because their belongings were too much, muchach, that this was the reason that forced them to leave. But the Piroshim Anal, if according to this Mefarshim, that he left because Yaakov was the Bchor, Arei mitam ze bilvad, shedinoi shel Yaakov oyo lirash Yitzchok oyo Esav muchach lalev esoretz. So why does the pasuk have to tell us the other reasons that there wasn't enough place? If you're talking legally, so then it's all legal. You had to leave. In other words, the word that the Rebbe says, according to this Mefarshim, he was forced to leave. There was a legal argument. It belongs to Yaakov. But in Pasuk it doesn't say he was forced. It says there was a reason. The land couldn't handle them. So therefore, Rashi brings this explanation, which is all reasons that doesn't force Esav to leave, but it makes sense and explains very beautifully why Taki ended up leaving. In the Shule Agilyon, it brings another pshat from the Avarvanel. The Avarvanel says that why did Esav leave? That Esav be'avoso is Yaakov v'nichoi beretz Knan bedatoi shoyo Yaakov chofetz bo ve'osid liyorsho. Avarvanel said that Esav Pashat loved Yaakov, and therefore he left him in Canaan, knowing that Yaakov wants to stay in Yaakov, and in the future also Yaakov is going to be the one who's going to be Yoresh, inherent Eretz Canaan. Ainu she'eina mistapeg ema she'osid liyorsho elo moisi be'avosoi inichoi bedatoi shoyo Yaakov chofetz bo. The Avarvanel adds that he loved them, therefore he left them. But obviously the Rebbe says, "Muvun sherashi lo pireshken ki bepashtes aregam laachre sheba Yaakov mechoron lo oya ve'esav es Yaakov." There wasn't any great love that Esav had to Yaakov, and Yaakov came back for Choron. And the Rebbe brings the Rashi in Vayashkeyu that it wasn't with a full heart, and even according to the second pshat in Rashi, it did kiss him with a full heart. It was only bois shor, it was only temporary. So therefore, Pshudish Mikro, we cannot accept either of those pshatim, neither the Rashbam or nor the Avarvanel. Okay, now we're turning to Se'ivav. In Se'ivav, the Rebbe now comes and explains why is there a third pshat in Rashi, the embarrassment. So he says, Elo shetam zeinu maspik adayin, it's still not enough. Nagam shelo yirotzo Esav lifroya ashtar choi, even though Esav Take was concerned, he didn't want to be a part of the dead. Mikol mokoi mikiv sheo echrech lazivoso yoretz ubi ose shel Yaakov. Ultimately, why did he have to leave the land? It was really only because Yaakov arrived. Ariyel was the achnoek ela beYaakov ubushe bifnei kol ha'amoret sheoilech logur b'asher imtzo ubilvad lo seis mi'oretz b'pnei Yaakov. You have another shaila. Get into the so-called into the psychology of Esav. Esav is now going to pick himself up and leave. So yeah, we have a very gishmaka reason. He was scared of the Shtar Choiv, and that's really made him to decide that it's time to leave, because also there is no place, and everything that we explained till now. But after all, Esav, wouldn't he be embarrassed that the brother comes in and he's the one who picks himself up? It's embarrassment for Esav. How are we explaining how did Esav deal with this embarrassment? Lochein moisiv Rashi. Comes Rashi and adds, and the Rebbe says, before he explains what Rashi adds, he says, Loi beloshen yesh oimrim pirush acher ke b'medrash. Not like Rashi doesn't add it as a different pshat. Ki b'medrash muvoim tamim elu betoi pirush aposlik v'pnei Yaakov v'chicho ochiv. Ve'im shnei pirushim ba'akosiv. The Medrash explained what does it mean he left in Yaakov v'Achiv. So the Medrash brings two pshatim, either v'pnei Shtar-Choiv or v'pnei Abusha. Aber kavonos Rashi, the Rebbe explained Rashi be'avio edivrei HaMedrash lo lefarish hakosum, not to explain v'pnei Yaakov v'Achiv. Sharei v'libel derech hapshat ein ze perush klal. Rashi doesn't learn pshat that this is why Yaakov, that's why Esav left. Rashi doesn't come to explain the words of Yaakov v'Achiv. Ki im lo idia taimim hamevar im hanogose shel Esav. Rashi only says, we are trying to understand why Esav was the one who chose and he picked himself up, Leilech le'eretz acheres ipnei Yaakov. Shetam harishon levad einoi maspik. The first reason is not enough. And why is it not enough? Because, what's with the busha? Now we are dealing with an issue of busha. We understand what bothered him. He was concerned, Shtar Choiv. But after all, there is busha. Says Rashi, no. Let me tell you a third pshat, which that pshat explains you why Esav was ready to move, even though it was a concern of embarrassment. What's it that word? So he says, היינו שבכלל לא יסו שיוסף של עשו בארץ כנען blula be'erge shel busha. In general, Esav staying in Canaan after Yaakov arrived was a mix with a feel of embarrassment. Ubefrat benochochusay shel Yaakov asher lo imocha b'choirosay. It was embarrassment as it is because people knew that he was he was a b'chor and somehow he sold his b'chor. Now that in the presence of Yaakov, he's the one who sold him the b'chor. Imagine you have to face him every day. This is the younger brother which I sold him the b'chor from the Zida Dashim. So it would have been an ongoing embarrassment. Muvun shekein muvun ma she'oisa v'ozav v'soret tipnei Yaakov agam sheniro b'zeh achnoi kelape Yaakov. Even though it seems like he's like putting himself under Yaakov, he's letting Yaakov be dominating, being the one staying in Eretz Yisrael. Ubusha shenitcho mipanov, and it's an embarrassment that he has to so-called being pushed off and move away to another country, but really it was a greater embarrassment for him to deal with Yaakov in Canaan rather than the embarrassment of living Canaan. This is ongoing, this is going to live, and that's it. But still, mit Tambusha levad, lo yoyo Esav odev smoking mugurov im kobne beisoy. Just for being embarrassed, he wouldn't live with his entire family, pick himself up just because the brother is now the b'chor. This itself is not a reason to make such a drastic move. It comes just as an addition. After Rashi brings the reason, which is the main reason number one, that he left because the concern of the death to be having to go to Golus, which is Iker Hasiba Deidel Alev, which is the main reason. Rashi brings also an additional reason, which explains why and how Esav was dealing with the embarrassment. Because Hazadiz was embarrassed, so at least to avoid that, he would rather move and kind of deal with a less ongoing embarrassment. So therefore, we explain now very well why we need all these three pshatim in Rashi. It all fits with the pasuk. The first word in Rashi is explaining the general reason why Taki left. And Rashi has to explain that the reason was sheep. And if the reason was sheep, it explains as to why is Esav the one who left. And still, after all, why do you care so much about your brother Yitzchak? I'm sorry, your brother Yaakov. For that Rashi brings the main explanation because Esav didn't want to deal with the shtar choiv of going to Golus. And if you wonder how comes how would he deal with the fact that he has to pick himself up and the embarrassment he will get for it, he was anyway dealing with an ongoing embarrassment, and that fits with all the insights that Rashi brings in his pshat. Comes If Zion, the Rebbe continues, there's still one thing which really needs explanation. What are we saying? That Esav doesn't want to go to Golus. So the Rebbe asked a very simple shaila. This gzeira, that you're going to be a stranger, they would be strangers in a land not theirs. It doesn't say which land. Rashi said, a land not theirs. Esav settling in Arseir, shemichutz le'eretz Canaan, arei ze atzmoi hu priyas hashtar choiv. What do you mean Esav is afraid of he's going to go to Golus? He's putting himself into a state of Golus. What is Golus? Golus means out of Eretz Yisrael, out of Eretz Canaan. It doesn't say that Golus is Mitzrayim. So now that Esav picks himself up and moves, so he's imposing Golus on himself. So what does it mean that he's afraid of going to Golus? He's going to Golus. So the Rebbe says a beautiful zeh. הגזירו המוטלת על זרעו של יצחק, ולהיות גר בארץ לא אלוהם, היינו שנמצא בארץ מגורוי כגר, ולא כתושב. The word is not just going to Golus. The word is going to Golus and filling in Golus as a stranger. You all added to this, I don't belong here. I'm a ger. I'm not a toishuv. I'm not a citizen. I'm not a resident. I'm a stranger. Ve'esov le'rotzo lifroya ashtar choiv b'chaim de ger. Kim davke vayeshev Esov b'arseir. But Esau, it was exactly the opposite. He did not want to have that feel while being alive that I'm going to be a stranger somewhere. It says, like it says in the Pasuk, Vayeshev Esau b'Arseir, says Pasuk Ches, he settled. He dwelled in Arseir. Benayid goes to Golus. Yaakov goes to Golus. Everywhere he is, he feels as a ger. Even in the most comfortable Golus, you feel a stranger. Esau did not go to Golus. He left Canaan, but he went into another country and settled in that country. Vayeshev Esau b'Arseir. So in Esau's perspective, that's not going to go to Golus. What he was concerned is needing to live at Israel and be somewhere like a stranger, and that's why he was ready to give it up for Yaakov. The Rebbe concludes, the time of Golus. It calls man piroi nashtar choiv, and yesenu begolus, as long that we are paying the debt, while still being in Golus, ad bias Mashiach tzidkenu, she'ilchem milchemes Hashem, ve'yenatzeach. He's going to fight Hashem's wars and be victorious. And build the Beit HaMikdash. And only after the Beit HaMikdash is built, the Kabetz Nitche Yisrael, he's going to gather all Jews, Keitz HaGolus, the Ends HaGolus. Until this point comes. And while we are in Golus, Alo Odom Lodas, a person needs to know, Velehargish, and to feel, Shehu Geir Be'eretz Loi Loi. I'm a stranger. Wherever you are, this is not your home. Never, God forbid, to settle into the time and order of Golus, rather to feel a stranger, lechol in Yonei Golus. This is not a place where I belong. Where am I? I am settling, toishav v'chazak bechol in Yonei Teiro mitzvahs. When it comes to regard to Teiro mitzvahs, Yonei Neshama, never went to Golus, as the famous word that he brings in 29, when the Friedrich Rebbe went to Kastrama, and he said that our bodies only are in Golus, but Neshavos never went to Golus. There is where you're settling in Torah mitzvahs. But as far as anything else, I'm a ger, I'm a stranger. Not like Esau, who is Vayeshev Esau be'Arseir. No, ki geri ezaracha. Until Mashiach comes. And rather, as long that we are in Golus, v'yechake, to wait, v'chol eiz v'rega, la'geula amitis al-yedei Mashiach tzidkenu, she'erichenu keimis la'artzenu, bekorev mamish.